Hello, I'm Ollie. This is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, horror. Today, I'm going to start doing a library tour, and the first box of books I've got to go through is a horror box. So, as you've probably seen, Steve Donoghue is doing a library tour at the moment, which I think is up to about video 10. And he's challenged other booktubers to do the same. So I decided I would take that challenge. I did a few videos, 3 or 4, I think 3 videos towards the end of last year, where I went through the books that are on the shelves behind me, the vast majority of which are unread. So I went through those as kind of a TBR for 2022, if you like. So I'm not going to go through those again, but what I am going to do is, like Michael K. Vaughan, most of my books are in boxes, which are up in the attic, just because I don't have room for them anywhere else in the house. Unlike Michael, I've got my books kind of sorted, so they're sorted by genre at a high level. So I've got kind of horror boxes, crime boxes, thriller boxes, general fiction boxes, and also by whether or not I've read the books in the box. So I know where to go if I want to randomly pick a crime novel that I haven't read. I know which box to go through. I've got a number of boxes. I haven't actually counted. I should have counted when I went up there just now how many I've got, but it's probably 12 or so, I guess. And what I'm going to do is I'll do a series of videos where I pluck a box down from the attic and go through it. I need to come up with some sort of labelling system so I don't do the same box twice, but we'll see how it goes. So anyway, today, for your viewing pleasure, I've got a horror box of horror books that I have read. I've had a very quick look, and some of them are ones that I've obviously put up there fairly recently because they're ones that I've reviewed on the channel so far. So some of them will be familiar, but not all of them by any means. So right, let's get on with it. Let's dive into the box and see what we got. Okay, so looks like the ones at the top of the box are ones that have more recently been put in there. So let me go through those. I'm just going to make a space on my desk to put them as I take them out. Right, so let's go. So first up, The Case Against Satan by Ray Russell, which is fantastic. So I read this last year as part of a Plagued by Visions read-along. It's a really great novel about demonic possession, but very even-handedly written, so you never really know whether the girl in question has actually been possessed or whether or not it's a case of kind of mass Catholic hysteria. But yeah, a very, very good book. Next up, Throat Sprockets by Tim Lucas, which I've done a video about, if you look back through my archives, which is a really excellent kind of pseudo-vampire novel. A really fascinating book about obsession, which I really, really enjoyed. Next up, another one that I've done a video on, so The Fisherman by John Langan, which is kind of a almost Lovecraftian story, but felt to me like it was written in the style of Stephen King, but a very enjoyable, very well written horror novel, which I liked very much. Next up, more horror, but something completely different. So Sinister Mix by Brian Bowyer, which is a really excellent extreme horror collection. So, you know, a ton of different stories in here, often very graphic, but all very well written. Unlike some of the extreme horror I've read, which I didn't take to at all, I thought this was a really strong collection. Enjoyed is the wrong word, but it's definitely worth reading. Okay, going back to the 80s, I think, and again, I have done a video on this one, so Vampire Junction by S.P. Somtow, which is a really good 80s vampire novel about this character on the front, Timmy Valentine, who's a child vampire who's become like a kind of teeny bopper star in 80s America. So a very good vampire novel, and I think there's at least 2 sequels to it, which I need to read. Next up, Ghoul by Michael Slade, so the second of the Special X series. So Michael Slade is, I think, a pseudonym for a group of lawyers, I think they were, who worked together, who have written, and the series is ongoing, this series of books about they're called Special X, so this police unit in Canada that investigates serial killers. They kind of have a bit of a supernatural element to them as well, some of them, but very gory, very enjoyable, kind of mix between horror and police procedural. Next up, the third Corona book of horror stories, which is a book I was sent to review a couple of years ago. I'm trying to remember. I remember enjoying it. I think I gave it 4 stars, but I can't remember if there's any memorable names in terms of the authors. It doesn't look like there's anyone particularly well known in it, but it is a good, solid collection of horror stories with a nice mix of styles in it. Okay, I'm just going to see what else. Right, okay, let's pick out. I've got one other one that's more recent, and then the rest are all kind of older. So this is, I'm going to have to look at the title, so I make sure I get it right. Every time we meet at the Dairy Queen, your whole fucking face explodes, by Carlton Mellick, which was a very enjoyable and weird kind of bizarro short novel about a guy who falls in love with this girl whose face explodes every time they meet. It's quite sweet. Very twisted, but quite sweet as well, and I did enjoy it. It's the only thing I've read by Carlton Mellick. He's got tons of stuff out. I would quite like to read something else by him because I did enjoy this. Right, all the rest of the stuff in here, I think, is like older stuff. So let's dig through it and see what we've got. Right, so The Supernatural by John G. Jones. So I think there's a Tudor paperback. So I have read this, but I read it like 30 years ago when I was a teenager, and I can't remember anything about it at all, so I should probably reread it, but I've definitely read it. I don't know anything about it. It's got a step back cover, which is rather nice. So yeah, I don't know why I picked up another copy of it. I must have found it in a second-hand bookshop or something. But yeah, as I say, if you've read it recently and remember anything about it, let me know. Right, I'm going to try and group these by author. So let's do the ones where I've only got one book by the author first. So we've got The Specialist by Jasper Smith, which I read quite recently. I think I read it since I started doing BookTube, which was pretty good. So it's either late 70s or early 80s British horror novel set in the Second World War about a Nazi general who specialises in torture, who's got these 2 women, one of whom is the wife of a Nazi general who is kind of rebelling against Hitler, who's part of a plot against Hitler, and the other of whom is like a gypsy girl, and basically it's about him torturing them, and it's as exploitative and nasty as it sounds, but it does have some real strength as well. So there's the relationship between the 2 women is really interestingly done. And there's also some really fascinating scenes. So every so often, all of it's kind of just focused on this small number of characters, but then every so often he kind of pans back or pulls back and gives you a description of what's going on during the war at that point to give you a bit of context to the events that are impacting the characters. So it's actually quite an interesting book. Next up, Scryer by Linda Crockett Gray. So this is another American one. This is a Tor book. This was okay. I read it within the last 3 or 4 years, and I can't remember what it was about at all, which suggests it wasn't that great. It's got I've set Alexa off somehow. I don't know if you can hear her in the background. Yeah, it's about someone who can kind of see the future, I think, but I seem to remember it wasn't all that great. Next up, now this is a good book. So Disturb Not the Dream by Paula Trautman, I'm not sure how you pronounce that name. This was a really messed up kind of Southern Gothic, almost in the vein of kind of Flowers in the Attic or something like that. But and again, I don't remember all the details of it, but I do remember it had some really messed up scenes in it. So if that's your kind of thing, check it out. I think it's still available on Kindle, if not in paperback anymore. Let me read you the blurb of this one quickly. It was all in the past, the memory safely buried with the bodies, the horror of the young couple in the attic bedroom hacked to death, their naked bodies mutilated, The girl at her dressing table, long hair hiding her wounds until the body slumped sideways to the floor, leaving the severed head staring sightless into the mirror. The parents stabbed, slashed, left to die, swilling in their own blood. Only one survivor, a 5-year-old girl, her mind destroyed by the horror she had seen, sitting and rocking, clutching a dead kitten. It was all in the past, 40 years forgotten, except that now another family had moved into the house and another 5-year-old played with another kitten. So yeah, I need to reread this because I do remember it being really fun in a gruesome and horrible way. Right, okay, moving on to authors I've got multiple books by. So let's do Dean Koontz first. So both of these I've read, but like, again, years ago, and I've rebought these copies since then. So I probably will reread these at some point. So we've got The Bad Place, which I don't remember very much about at all, other than I think this is the one where one of the characters has a voice that sounds like the guy who played Napoleon Solo with The Man from U.N.C.L.E. His name I now forget. It's either The Bad Place or Cold Fire that's got that. But anyway, kind of a mid-period Koontz book, which I seem to remember was okay. And Strangers by Koontz, which I think I quite liked. So it's one of those books I really like where the author just gets a random group of characters and throws them together in a mystery. And you know, it takes a while to kind of reveal the past of the characters and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that's one I seem to remember being pretty good, which I'll definitely reread at some point. Oh, actually, there is another author I've only got one book by here. So Summer of Night by Dan Simmons, which I read when it came out and remember really, really liking. So it's plot-wise, it's kind of similar to It by Stephen King, and it's about a group of kids in a small town where horrible stuff's happening, and the kids are trying to figure out what's going on and stop it. But I remember this being a really, really solid, strong horror novel, so definitely do want to reread that at some point. Moving on then. Oh, there's one more, but I've just got one book by. So The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. No introduction needed. I read this again. I think I've only read this once, and I think it was when I was a teenager. And that was back in the days when The Exorcist, the movie, was still banned in the UK. So I don't know if people outside of the UK, or even younger people in the UK, know that, but The Exorcist was banned for a long time in the UK following. So when it was first released over here at the cinema, there were kind of supposedly cases of people going into hysterics and things like that. And it got banned at the cinema and was never released on video until, I guess, sometime in the 90s. I think it was finally released on video and DVD, at which point I saw it, having never seen it, but I read the book as a teenager. Right, so we've got 2 authors left to go, but several books. So the first author is Clive Barker. So we have got here The Hellbound Heart, obviously famously filmed as Hellraiser, which is a very good novella. And then what I think is still his masterpiece. I'm not a big fan of his longer novels, but the Books of Blood series, so all 6 volumes of that, which are, if you've not read them, a fantastic series of short stories. You know, lots of body horror, lots of very weird horror, but just excellent, full of such, you know, incredible imagination. So with covers, I think these covers are by Clive Barker as well. So book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, and book 6. So yeah, an excellent short story collection. It's one of the greatest short story collections in the history of horror, in my opinion. Right, that leaves us with James Herbert. So as with all of these books, these are all books that I've you know, the ones I read when I was a teenager, I have rebought as an adult, having got rid of hundreds of books when I was in my 20s and just literally didn't have any room for them. So I had, you know, I think all of James Herbert's novels when I was younger, and have subsequently rebought them. I'm going to try and go through them in kind of chronological order, if I can remember when they came out. So we've got his first novel, The Rats, which is an absolute cracker. If you've not read it, it's about killer rats. You know, what more could you want in a book? Fantastic stuff. We've got The Fog. So this is not the first edition of the paperback, but definitely my favourite cover, and probably certainly my favourite cover for The Fog, and probably my favourite cover of any horror novel, or indeed any book ever. So I remember as a kid seeing this cover and being, you know, traumatized but fascinated by it. It's, I think, a beautifully executed cover and wonderfully grim. And the book is pretty good too. It suffers from the plot being a bit ploddy and slow at times, and just some of the scenes being a bit odd. This kind of huge cloud of fog making its way across the UK, but the horror scenes in this are really first rate. The fog drives people to kill each other, and it does so in fantastically gory fashion. Right, I'm going to get a bit lost in terms of what came next for James Herbert. I think it might have been The Spear. So this is a really good novel about the kind of Nazis' use of the occult, and about someone who, it's about I think a hunt for this by a group of neo-Nazis for this mythical spear, which is, and it's a good solid horror novel, more of a thriller than a lot of his other books, so it's got kind of espionage bits in it as well. The Survivor, again, I really love this kind of vintage cover. So The Survivor is about a guy who survives a plane crash and is kind of haunted thereafter. Really good. Filmed in the 70s with Jenny Agutter, who famously was the nurse in American Werewolf in London, and also British people will know was one of the Railway Children. So yeah, that's a pretty good one. The Jonah, which I don't remember much about. The Jonah, I definitely read it, but I don't remember very much about it. But again, quite a cool cover. The Dark, which is kind of almost like a remake of The Fog, but with a dark that sends people nuts rather than a fog that sends people nuts. But again, quite enjoyable and quite a cool cover. Let's do the other Rats books then. So we've got Lair, which is the first sequel to The Rats, which is pretty good. And then Domain, which is the second sequel to The Rats. So this one a bit thicker and a bit more adventurous. And then there was another one as well, which I don't have, which I think was called 1948, which is kind of a throwback in that it's set during the Second World War, or just after the Second World War. But yeah, Domain was pretty good, I seem to remember. I just realised, I don't think I'd realised this before, they've actually used the rat from The Rats on the cover of Lair, rather than paying someone to draw a new rat. They've just used the original rat. I'll try and remember. Try and remember to put up a copy for the French edition of The Rats, which is hilarious. So hopefully I've remembered and it's up here. But yes, Les Rats by James Herbert, or as someone on Twitter pointed out, it could be a book called James Herbert by someone called Les Rats. Moving on to kind of slightly later James Herbert. So The Magic Cottage, which is kind of a haunted house story, which I remember reading when it came out when I was in my teens. Creed, which I don't remember anything about. I think this is one of a series that he wrote about a photographer. But yeah, I don't remember too much about that one. And Others, which is another kind of haunted house one, a ghosty one. And then finally, The Ghost of Sleeth, which again is a kind of haunted one. But I think this might even have been his last book. It's certainly one of his later ones. So yeah, that was my my first library tour. I have plenty more books in plenty more boxes up in the attic, so I will be getting another box down at some point and talking through the books in that. But hopefully you've enjoyed that. Let me know if you've read any of these. I'm sure many people have read at least one of these. Possibly one of the Herberts or the Clive Barkers. So yeah, let me know what you thought of them. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon. Cheerio.